Tonight, new questions about the prosecutor who charged the 6 Baltimore cops who were involved in the arrest of the late Freddie Gray. Our legal panel will weigh in on whether she in a bit too much of a rush because of things getting a bit too out of hand. We'll show you his comments and we'll talk to the table. Then we'll look at the charges against Dean SKELOS. How strong is the government's case against the Senate Majority Leader? And some boxing fans, I'll count myself among them, are more than a little ticked how Saturday night went down, but some are actually suing, going after Manny Pacquiao for up to $5 million because he hid an injury. Pacquiao made $100 million even though he lost in the ring. Is he going to lose in court? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and tonight all about the law as it is on Wednesday. And first on the docket, we go to Baltimore, and the 6 police officers now facing charges for their role in the death of Freddie Gray. Prosecutor Marilyn Mosby, she's now taking heat in some corners for acting too quickly to charge them and in how she charged them. She's also being accused of reacting to the simmering situation in Baltimore. I will play her own words, and then we'll talk to the table and let you at home decide.
To the people of Baltimore and the demonstrators across America, I heard your call for no justice, no peace. Your peace is sincerely needed as I work to deliver justice on behalf of this young man.
Now, the paper of record in Baltimore had this editorial in it, and it was filled with criticism of Ms. Mosby. Alan Dershowitz, among others, says that she used her power as, quote, crowd control. Former state's attorney says Mosby's actions were either incompetent or reckless. Let's bring in our table right now and get their takes. Jimmy Kasuris, he's a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, also sitting on the board of directors for the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens, New York City, also visiting professor at the University of Birmingham in England, and he, a former prosecutor in New York City. Doug Von Oist, the founding partner of Carson Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct, and was selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. He also a former prosecutor out on Long Island. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office, and Mark Furnish, a professor at Brooklyn Law, and he's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll be talking about everything from high court here to class action suits and everything else, but let's start in Baltimore, guys, here, and may I start with you? From an amateur watching this, and certainly the 48 to 72 hours that preceded what happened in Baltimore, it did seem that the charges that she's bringing against these 6 officers, given the evidence that we know about to this point, and the language in which she conveyed in that setting on how she was going to pursue this, it did seem that either she was putting the cart before the horse or that she was taking into account the simmering situation in Baltimore that could have gotten worse. And as one person said in that editorial, she may be exercising a bit of crowd control. What do you think?
I think that we have to want justice, and we want that for everybody, whether you're law enforcement or you're somebody from the community. It has to be a search for the truth. But what I have to say is that when it's the Central Park 5 and you have the mayor of New York City and you have the prosecutor calling the kids animals, with no time at all, immediately making arrests, coercing confessions, and then ultimately finding out that none of those 5 were involved in the crime, no one cries out. And in this case, we don't really know all of the facts. What I would suggest, though, is that you want to have all of the facts. You want to make sure that the facts basically fit the crime. There's been some suggestion that the knife that Mr. Gray had would have been a violation of Baltimore County Code, and it wouldn't have been a Maryland state law violation, but it would have possibly given them a reason to detain him. But nonetheless, even if it did, even if you lawfully arrest someone, you can't kill that person. You can't use excessive force.
In Mayo, I guess my question is, in no way justification, because it doesn't seem to be what happened to Freddie Gray, but your very point, I think you make the most compelling argument. Look what happened with the Central Park 5. Right. There was such an anger that was boiling over, and for many point that was the symbolic tipping point here for crime out of control in the city and Central Park and the Wildings and everything at the time, that there was a rush to justice because they needed a scalp, or in this case 5 scalps. We learned that playing to the public sentiment was wrong. Is there a threat or a risk at this point with what we know and what she's charging these guys with, all 6, that A, she could be overcharging, and she too could be playing to the crowd. And the language and the rhetoric that she did in saying it, she better be able to prove her case, because, I mean, she basically convicted these guys on the steps of Baltimore.
Lots of these officers, what happens here again though, happens to people who are not law enforcement each and every day. If you go to any city, the courtrooms are full of people who,
I know,
who
but
have
there's
that.
not 100 cameras waiting out there, waiting for where she's going to charge him, how she's going to charge him, and the rhetoric she's going to use to do it.
That's correct, but the bail for the protesters is higher than the bail was for the officers. So the bail for people who got arrested simply for being disorderly at a protest could be $500,000, and the people who are perhaps responsible for Mr. Gray losing his life had bail set at $250,000. The goal should not be a win or a loss. There should be no sides anybody has.
Do you think she jumped the gun?
I don't know yet, but what I can say is that unfortunately our society is divided to the point where half of the society wants the officers to be guilty and half don't. It shouldn't be. That should not be the dynamic. The dynamic should be what is the truth and what happened here.
Let's get to the charges, Jimmy, because to me, there were no cameras inside that van. Freddie Gray should not be dead right now, and I don't think any of the five of us are going to debate that. But we don't know exactly what happened from when he went in to how he ended up dead. And the charges that she's bringing, just short of first-degree murder, right? I mean, that's a high hurdle to prove. And how she did it, did your ears go up a little bit saying, ooh?
Well, right now, all we have is a medical examiner who's concluded that it's a homicide, who's concluded that there was an injury to the head that's consistent with something in the back of the truck. Look, I do think she jumped the gun. It's hard for these prosecutors to get it right. I mean, here,
Jimmy,
you don't
can
use
we
it.
say she jumped the gun? Far be it from me to ever defend a prosecutor. I've never spent one day being one. These people in the environment, the climate we're in now, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Mark,
Mark, you used the word climate. Okay, time out.
But Mark,
of course she was engaging in crowd control. Of course she was doing it. What, are we shocked that there's gambling in the casino? The streets were in flames. These are charges. She will have to prove them, and if she doesn't, she'll be
arrest them and present it to a grand jury. I mean, I'm not saying don't act. I'm not saying don't act, but within 48 hours and possibly in just trying to quell the crowd, I'm not saying don't arrest. There clearly it was probable cause to arrest, but you bypass the grand jury, you have some sheriff come in just to sign off on it.
They're still going to have to
but they have to present it to the grand jury eventually, though. And Jim, the other thing is...
I don't know about that under Maryland law.
No, you
There's
don't.
no Fifth
You
Amendment.
don't.
Well, but then you
grand
still
jury
get an
rights.
opportunity to fully challenge it. But the only thing I will say is this, and it happens in all these cases. We have tiny bit of information. Presumably, there's got to be much more than simply an autopsy report showing that his head hit a bolt. So I'm sure you're going to have witnesses who made statements. You're going to have police officers who may have contradicted each other. Maybe you don't have that, but there's a lot more that prosecutor's office has than what we're aware of.
We spent a lot of time at this table. The five of us have
police
spent a lot of
procedures.
time at this table talking about a recurring theme here, inequities and justice and all that. I'm just saying for a second, I don't think any of the four of you, if you had a client, and the prosecutor was saying, in effect, this is crowd control here, just like you said, who are we talking about, and that they were going to use them as a symbol, you guys would be pounding on the table saying, wait a second, they're using my guy as an example.
But you know, Rich, this could be as simple as one of these men or ladies made a statement implicating the group in the crimes that they're charged with. At that point, the prosecutor has no choice but to go forward
Okay,
and
I'm with
seek
you,
the
Doug, but
charges.
stay with me now. They got to pursue the charges. Again, I don't think we got any breathing room, any daylight on this one. But what I'm questioning is, do you want to put yourself in a box now? Because you got to prove what you're saying, and you've told the world here, and you've told the world here, she can drop the charges, but then all of a sudden she's going to open herself up to criticism again that she overcharged him from jump.
I don't think so. I think what's going to happen here is the fact that there were charges brought is unique, and unfortunately, in the criminal justice system when police are involved, and the convictions are even lower. I think 1/4 of the police that are charged actually get convicted. But if you look at a case that really makes you raise your eyebrows, look at the kayaker in the Hudson River. She's being charged with her fiance's murder. There's not even a body. For all we know, this gentleman may be out there. He may come home tomorrow morning. And look at the runaway bride. So we do this every single day in the American jurisprudence system.
You've been in this spot before, maybe not this as high profile a case here, but you go to your DA and you say, all right, this is what I got. Are they basically, is she out on her own here?
Everybody's conditioned to watching these TV shows where there's all this evidence. Sometimes the best evidence is the statements of the people that are involved in the crime. I assume she has something here that this is something more that she gets to murder. So I assume there's some statement from somebody implicating these people.
All of the fuss about the overcharging, as Mayo indicated earlier, stems from the propriety of the arrest, and the debate is completely wrong, because it really doesn't matter if there's actual probable cause. It's if there is a reasonable but mistaken, even a mistaken belief that a crime is afoot. So long as it's a reasonable mistake, that's the justification to arrest. So this is a whole lot of smoke here. And Dershowitz, I have tremendous respect for him. He doesn't know what the evidence is. None of us do. It's just blustering.
But my only point is, don't you think
in the back of that van?
Nobody
That's
if they're
what
doing crowd control, which we
Which
all
they
agree
are.
they were,
Yeah.
then don't you think they would have put out some more compelling evidence that they've got some more stuff?
No, she did enough to mollify the crowd, and then she rightly said, we're not going to try this case in the public, and it's going to be tried in a court, and I'm not at liberty to disclose the evidence. Disperse the crowd, pacified everyone, and if she screws the case up, she's accountable at the ballot box. I don't see the
thing
problem
that's
here.
most troubling to me is that when you have cities that go up in flames, the Department of Justice is always there. When you don't, when you have Tamir Rice and no one's burning Cleveland down, you can't find them. It takes them 4 or 5 years to come to a determination that there was wrongdoing, or in fairness to the cops, if there was no wrongdoing, it takes them 4 or 5 years to say that as well. It's not that deep. So what you look at is they're reacting to the fact that there's unrest. It shouldn't be. That should not be the analysis. The analysis should be, do we need to come in and do we need to review this case? I think
do
you
we
should
need
have
to get? Do we need to get somebody without any skin in the
Independent
game?
prosecutor.
We've
Well,
been
she's
here
Again,
got,
you
she's
mentioned
already
before.
appealing to Loretta Lynch to come in more
Right.
than they're already in. And look, here's the
And by the way,
counterpoint to this.
you mentioned before, she's running for office
Well,
too,
look,
and
if
that's
she-
another component to
Well,
this.
that's true. That the flip side is
And we don't have
exactly
time,
that.
but her own personal biography, fascinating. Got law enforcement family, but also had a cousin who was like a sister, shot dead mistakenly by the police. I mean, this thing is going to be...
That's the flip side. If she doesn't bring charges right now, she's also accountable at the ballot box.
All right. So we solved it all for you at home. We want you to get involved in this conversation. Head over to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on our question. Did the prosecutor rush to charge, if not charge, overcharge the officers in this case here? As usual, Mark says, I got the question all wrong in the first place. All right, now speaking of prosecutors, do the ones who just charged Dean SKELOS have a compelling case, and where could this thing go from here? More and more of the details are coming out. We'll catch up, and then we'll also ask Illegal Eagles whether they think SKELOS could be toast.